terms of wording, but different in terms of substance. I explained that as a result, some honourable and right honourable members were seeking further changes to the withdrawal agreement, and I requested a short extension to the Article 50 process to the 30th of June. I regret having to do so. I wanted to deliver Brexit on the 29th of March, but I'm conscious of my duties as Prime Minister to all parts of our United Kingdom and of the damage that union leaving without a deal could do when one part of it is without devolved government and unable, therefore, to prepare properly. The Council formally endorsed the legal instrument relating to the withdrawal agreement and the joint statement supplementing the political declaration. This should increase the confidence of the House that the backstop is unlikely ever to be used and would only be temporary if it is. But the Council also reiterated, once again, its long-standing position that there could be no reopening of the withdrawal agreement. So however the House decides to proceed this week, everyone should be absolutely clear that changing the withdrawal agreement is simply not an option. Turning to extending Article 50, this has always required the unanimous agreement of the other 27 member states. As I've made clear before, it was never guaranteed that the EU would agree to an extension or the terms on which we requested it, and they did not. Instead, the Council agreed that if the House approves the withdrawal agreement this week, our departure will be extended to 11 p.m. on the 22nd of May. This will allow time for Parliament to pass the withdrawal agreement bill, which is legally necessary for the deal to be ratified. But if the House does not approve the withdrawal agreement this week, our departure will instead be extended only to 11 p.m. on the 12th of April. At this point, we would either leave with no deal, or we would indicate a way forward before this date for consideration by the European Council. If this involved a further extension, it would certainly mean participation in the European parliamentary elections. The Council's conclusions were subsequently turned into a legal decision, with which the UK agreed and which came into force last Friday. So while the Government has today laid a statutory instrument, which will be debated later this week, to reflect this in our domestic legislation, the date for our departure from the EU has now changed in international law. Were the House not to pass the statutory instrument, it would cause legal confusion and damaging uncertainty, but it would not have any effect on the date. But it would not have any effect on the date of our exit. Mr. Speaker, I continue to believe that the right path forward is for the United Kingdom to leave the EU as soon as possible with a deal, now on the 22nd of May. But it is with great regret that I have had to conclude that, as things stand, there is still not sufficient support in the House to bring back the deal for a third meaningful vote. I continue to have discussions with colleagues across the House to build support so that we can bring the vote forward this week and guarantee Brexit. If we cannot, the Government made a commitment that we would work across the House to find a majority on a way forward. The amendment in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, seeks to provide for this process by taking control of the order paper. I continue to believe doing so would be an unwelcome precedent to set, which would overturn the balance of our democratic institutions. So the Government will oppose this amendment this evening, but in order to fulfil our commitments to this House, would seek to provide Government time in order for this process to proceed. It would be for this House to put forward options for consideration and to determine the procedure by which they wish to do so. But I must confess that I am sceptical about such a process of indicative votes. When we've tried this kind of thing in the past, it's produced contradictory outcomes or no outcome at all. There is a further risk when it comes to Brexit, as the UK is only one half of the equation, and the votes could lead to an outcome that is unnegotiable with the EU. No government could give a blank cheque to commit to an outcome without knowing what it is. So I cannot commit the Government to delivering the outcome of any votes held by this House, but I do commit to engaging constructively with this process. There are many different views on the way forward. But I want to explain the options as I understand them. The default outcome continues to be to leave with no deal. But this House has previously expressed its opposition to that path and may very well do so again this week. The alternative is to pursue a different form of Brexit or a second referendum. But the bottom line remains. If the House does not approve the withdrawal agreement this week and is not prepared to countenance leaving without a deal, we will have to seek a longer extension. This would entail the UK having to hold European elections, and it would mean that we will not have been able to guarantee Brexit. These are now choices the House will have the opportunity to express its view on. Mr. Speaker, this is the first chance I've had to address the House since my remarks last Wednesday evening.
The House must calm itself. The Prime Minister is addressing the House and must be heard. Colleagues know from the record that they have a full opportunity to question the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister.
I expressed my frustration with our collective failure to take a decision, but I know that many members across this House are frustrated too, and we all have difficult jobs to do. People on all sides of the debate hold passionate views, and I respect those differences. I would also like to thank those colleagues, all of those colleagues that have supported the deal so far, and those that have taken the time to meet with me to discuss their concerns. I hope we can all agree we are now at the moment of decision, and in doing so we must confront the reality of the hard choices before us. Unless this House agrees to it, no deal will not happen. No Brexit must not happen, and a slow Brexit, which extends Article 50 beyond the 22nd of May, forces the British people to take part in European elections and gives up control of any of our borders, laws, money or trade, is not a Brexit that will bring the British people together. I know that the deal I've put forward is a compromise. It seeks to deliver on the referendum and retain trust in our democracy, while also respecting the concerns of those who voted to remain. But if this House can back it, we could be out of the European Union in less than 2 months. There will be no further extensions, no threat to Brexit, and no risk of a no deal. That, I believe, is the way to deliver the Brexit the British people voted for, and I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of the statement and for the meetings that we've had in recent days. Mr. Speaker, the government's approach to Brexit has now become a national embarrassment. After 2 years of failure, broken promises after broken promises, the Prime Minister finally accepted the inevitable last week and voted to extend Article 50 and went to Brussels to negotiate. Last week's summit represented another negotiating failure for the Prime Minister. Her proposals were rejected and new terms were imposed on her. We now have an extension until mid-April or May the 22nd. And despite the clearly expressed will of this House, we will still face the prospect of a disastrous no-deal Brexit. This is even more remarkable given that the Minister for the Cabinet Office told this very chamber, and I quote, "Seeking such a short and critically one-off extension would be, in his words, downright reckless." Mr. Speaker, this failure has been compounded by the Prime Minister's attempts last week to pin the blame for this debacle on others. It was wholly inappropriate last Wednesday for the Prime Minister to try and pit the people against MPs. MPs elected here doing their duty to hold the government of the day to account. That is what Parliament exists for. And in a climate of heightened emotions where MPs on all sides have received threats and intimidation, I hope the Prime Minister will further reflect and think again about making what I believe to be such dangerous and irresponsible statements. Yes. Every step of the way along this process, the government has refused to reach out, refused to listen and refused to find a consensus that can represent the views of the whole country, not just the Conservative Party. Large parts of our country continue to be ignored by this government. No wonder so many people felt compelled to march on the streets or sign petitions over the weekend. Even the most ardent of Leavers, Mr. Speaker, the most ardent of Leavers think this government has failed. It's easy to understand the frustration at this chaos. It exists in this House, in Brussels and across the country. The government has no plan. For them, it's all about putting the Conservative Party before the country. Given that the Prime Minister admitted she does not have the numbers for her deal, will she accept today that her deal is dead and that the House should not have its time wasted giving the same answer for a third time? Yep. But the Prime Minister has succeeded in unifying two sides against her deal. The CBI and the TUC's unprecedented joint statement last week demanded a Plan B which protects jobs, workers, industry and communities. Has the Prime Minister got a Plan B? No. The government has failed and let the people down, whether they voted leave or whether they voted remain. The country cannot continue to afford a Tory crisis. It's time, Mr. Speaker, for Parliament to take control. And that's why, later today, we will be backing the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset. You made it clear last week, Mr. Speaker, that for the Prime Minister to bring a deal back, there must be significant changes. There are none. Rather than trying to engineer a way to bring back the same twice-rejected deal, will the Prime Minister instead allow, rather than fight plans for indicative votes? She cannot both accept her deal does not have the numbers and stand in the way of finding an alternative that may have the numbers. It is ridiculous to suggest that Parliament taking control is overturning democratic institutions. It's not, Mr. Speaker. It's Parliament doing its democratic job of holding government to account. So, Mr. Speaker, will she agree to abide by the outcome of these indicative votes if they take place on Wednesday? On behalf of the Labour Party, we will continue with cross-party discussions to find a way forward, and I thank those members who have met with colleagues of mine and myself to have these discussions. I believe there is support in this House for a deal based on an alternative that protects jobs, the economy through a customs union and full single market access, and allows us to continue the benefit from participation in vital agencies and security measures. If the government refuses to accept this, we will support measures for a public vote to stop a no-deal or chaotic Tory deal. The government has had over 2 years to find a solution and has failed. It's time, Mr. Speaker, we put an end to this and move on from the chaos and failure and begin to clean up the mess. It's time for Parliament to work together and agree on a Plan B. If she's brave, the Prime Minister would help facilitate for this. If not, Parliament must send a clear message in the coming days. Mr. Speaker, I hope where the government has failed, this House can and will succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Right Honourable Gentleman indicates that we still face the prospect of no deal. The House has rejected no deal. As I said earlier, the House has rejected it. It's rejected, I think, twice now, and could very well continue to reject it. But the only way of actually putting that into practice is to support a deal. Now, he talks about reaching out. I have reached out to party leaders across this House and to other members of this House. My Right Honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, have both held a number of meetings with members across this House and with party leaders. But the Right Honourable Gentleman ended by saying that it is now time for the House to decide. But the point is that up till now the House has not decided. The House has had... Yet again, honourable members on the opposition benches say they haven't had a chance. The House has had many chances to put amendments down. The House has voted twice on the Right Honourable Gentleman's plans for the future and rejected them. It has voted to reject no deal. It has also voted to reject a second referendum. He asked whether I was going to, whether the government would commit to abide by the indicative votes. I did, as the Right Honourable Gentleman accepted, give him advance notice of my statement. I then read the statement. It did clearly say I cannot commit the government to delivering the outcome of any votes held by this House. And honourable members, well, the Shadow Foreign Secretary shouts that's not good enough. If she just thinks about this, for a moment, just thinks about this. First of all, we don't know what the options are going to be that will be tabled. Secondly, we don't know what will be selected. But there's another point. I think it is important that no one would want to support an option which contradicted the manifesto on which they stood for election to this House. And the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster obviously will be opening the debate this afternoon and will refer to the processes that are involved in the House. But the Right Honourable Gentleman said it was important that MPs were elected here to make decisions, yes, to take responsibility and to make decisions. But the MPs elected here to this House at this time have a duty to respect the result of the referendum that took place in 2016, and attempts to stop that result of that referendum being put into place, or attempts to change that result of that referendum, are not respecting the voters and not respecting our democracy. And then finally, the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned the fact that a number of people had marched on the question of a second referendum. Indeed.
Order. The House is in a very agitated state, but it's at an early stage in the proceedings. Calm. The Prime Minister.
The Right Honourable Gentleman referred to the fact that a march for a second referendum took place. It is, in fact, the Right Honourable Gentleman's policy. I noticed that his deputy went on the march. I thought the Right Honourable Gentleman normally jumped at any opportunity to go on a march, but on this occasion he wasn't actually there. I can only assume on this occasion he was involved but not present.
Sir John Redwood.
Will the Prime Minister say to a Leave voter who wants us to leave on the 29th of March and thinks that indicative votes are a waste of time because, as she rightly says, the options on offer have already been rejected once or twice in this Parliament?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right that the options that appear to be on offer have already been rejected by this Parliament. I would have to point out, of course, that for reasons that I explained in my statement in relation particularly to the governance of part of the United Kingdom, we have requested the extension to Article 50, so that 29th of March date is no longer there. But I would say to a Leave voter, we can guarantee Brexit. We can guarantee Brexit and leaving on the 22nd of May by supporting, as the Council conclusion suggests, by supporting the deal that has been put forward. That is the way to guarantee Brexit. Anything else does not guarantee Brexit.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement. Mr. Speaker, we are in a crisis, but one of the Prime Minister's own making. Her ill-judged speech before she departed for Brussels concluded that everyone's to blame but herself, trying to put herself on the side of the people and blaming parliamentarians. Mr. Speaker, it was Trump-esque. We don't need such raw populism at a time like this. It is truly flabbergasting. Will she now apologise for blaming parliamentarians the way that she did today? The Prime Minister needs to be reminded she's supposed to be leading a country. None on these benches think she can deliver. Her backbenchers don't think she can deliver. People right across the United Kingdom don't think she can deliver. Prime Minister, time is up. Mr. Speaker, today is about parliamentarians taking back control. People at home are watching, and they are ashamed of this Parliament, ashamed of this government, ashamed of the embarrassment that British politics has become. Parliament today must move to find a consensus. We must come together and protect the interests of citizens across Scotland and all other parts of the United Kingdom. Members, we still have a choice. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister, now with all sincerity, will she respect the will of Parliament and reject no deal? You know, when the Prime Minister is telling us that our votes don't count, at the same time Privy Councillors are being given briefings by her government, and those briefings are talking about the catastrophe and the real risks that there are to the United Kingdom, and it's the Prime Minister that is threatening the people of the United Kingdom with a no deal, and a no deal that this Parliament has already rejected. Mr. Speaker, what is the point of all of us sitting in this chamber and voting on debates, and the Prime Minister thinks she can ignore parliamentary sovereignty? What a disgrace! What an insult to this place! Because if our votes don't count, then frankly, we may as well just go home. If this House... Well, I'll tell you something, Mr. Speaker. If this Prime Minister is telling the people of Scotland that our votes don't count when we voted to remain, well, we know what the answer is, and the day is coming that the people of Scotland will vote for independence, and we will be an independent country in the European Union. So, will the Prime Minister tell us, do our votes count? Are they binding on the government, or is this just a puppet show? If that is the case, this is the greatest assault on democracy inflicted by any Prime Minister, and if members of Parliament are prepared to tolerate that, then shame on them. Shame on them. Mr. Speaker, Scotland will not be dragged out of the European Union by this Prime Minister. From the very beginning of this process, Scotland has been ignored, and now we learn that Parliament will once again be ignored. Mr. Speaker, at the weekend I was proud and privileged to take part in a historic march in London. I was proud to stand with the people alongside Scotland's First Minister and demand that the government listen to the people. And let me tell the Prime Minister this, she said that no deal is the alternative. Well, we on these benches will move revoke, because the Scottish parliamentarians have made sure that we have that power, and we will stop the Prime Minister driving us off a cliff edge. Over 1 million people marched to have the chance to vote again, to stop this chaos. Prime Minister, why are you not listening? Mr. Speaker, the PM must end this madness. Put it to the people. Let's have a people's vote.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, he was putting forward a number of proposals for the way forward in the speech that he has just given in response to my statement. There was one point at which he talked about Scotland voting to be an independent, would vote to become an independent country in the European Union. Of course, what was perfectly clear in the independence referendum in 2014, where Scotland rejected independence and decided to stay. Oh, the right honourable gentleman says, give it a rest. He stands up here proclaiming the benefits of democracy, and yet tells me to give it a rest when I point out that the people of Scotland voted to remain part of the United Kingdom. And he talks about coming together. This House has a duty to deliver Brexit. That means, I believe, delivering a Brexit with a deal that enables that smooth and orderly exit. And when he asked the question about whether his vote counts and votes in this House count, then of course votes in this House count. But so do the votes of 17.4 million people who voted to leave the European Union.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The statutory instrument for extension of time was laid 1 hour ago. There is grave concern that there was no lawful UK authority for the decision on March the 22nd to extend the exit date. Did the Prime Minister seek the Attorney-General's advice beforehand, as clearly required by both the Ministerial Code and the Cabinet Manual, and will she publish that advice? And why did she not invoke the commencement order for Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act, repealing the European Communities Act 1972?
The right honourable gentleman talks about the decision to extend Article 50. This House had supported an extension of Article 50. Yes, the Council took a different decision in relation to the length of time that extension could take place for, but it was clear from this House, and people are saying to me, listen to this House and respect the House was clear that an extension of Article 50 should be sought, and an extension was agreed.
Mr Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has told the House that if her withdrawal agreement is not approved by this Friday, then the extension we have been granted will only last until the 12th of April. If the Prime Minister currently does not intend to bring her deal back for another vote, she will then be faced with only two choices. Either doing nothing, in which case we will leave with no deal on the 12th of April, or applying for a further extension. Given the crisis that is facing our country, the public have a right to know which of those two options the Prime Minister intends to choose. Prime Minister, could you please tell us?
The right honourable gentleman is right that I said that as things stand, I did not believe there was support for bringing back a meaningful vote, but I also indicated that I was continuing to talk to colleagues across this House, and I would hope to be able to bring back a vote in this House that enables us to guarantee Brexit, because the one way of guaranteeing Brexit is to abide by the decision that was taken last week and ensure that we leave on the 22nd of May.
Mrs. Theresa Villiers.
Prime Minister welcomed the comments of the Taoiseach over the weekend that he believes that there are special arrangements that could be put in place to maintain an invisible border on the island of Ireland, even in the event that the UK leaves without a deal.
We have, as my right honourable friend knows, and she's been involved in some of these discussions, been looking at the alternative arrangements that could be put in place, and further work is required. But I would also draw my right honourable friend's attention to, I believe, a release by the European Commission today in which they make clear that in all circumstances all EU laws would have to be abided by.
Mr. Vincent Cable.
Those of us who were among the million on Saturday naturally regret that both she and the Leader of the Opposition were too busy to join us. But can I ask, does she agree with the observation of her Chancellor that such a referendum would be a perfectly coherent proposition?
Well, gentlemen, I think virtually every time he stands up in either a statement or a speech, a debate where I'm opening a debate here in this House on this subject, tends to ask me about a second referendum. My view about a second referendum is very simple. I wasn't not on the march because I was too busy, as he says, but of course he and I hold a different opinion about a second referendum. I believe it's important for this House, rather than talking about and wanting to pass the decision back to the British people again, to actually say to the British people, we will abide by the instruction that you gave us in the referendum in 2016.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
The cost to the British people of the amount of money which will be payable under the deal that the Prime Minister has put forward is between £34 and £39 billion. What does the government estimate the cost to the United Kingdom of no deal?
Well, my right honourable friend asks an important question. We have published economic analysis which shows the impact of no deal. Of course, as a government, we have put over £4 billion is being spent in preparations for leaving the European Union with or without a deal. But as I say, there is economic analysis which shows the impact of no deal over the coming months. My own view is that over time we would be able to address the issues that arose, but there would be an immediate impact to the economy.
Yvette Cooper.
The Prime Minister said that she is prepared to provide for indicative votes and also to engage constructively with the process. But she has also, and appeared to again be, many times ruled out supporting a customs union. So can I ask her, if a customs union is supported as part of some indicative votes, is she ruling out the government attempting to negotiate a customs union with the European Union?
The Right Honourable Lady has asked me on a number of occasions about a customs union. I've made my view on a customs union very clear. That, and I think there are a number of proposals that have been suggested over time in this House for alternative ways forward in relation to a deal. But there are a number of questions that members need to ask themselves in relation to those issues. So in talking about a customs union, what are the rules that the Right Honourable Lady would see actually being abided by? Would they involve abiding by state aid rules? In some of the proposals that have been put forward, there's a real question about free movement, and would free movement continue to be abided by? My own view is, having stood, I stood on a manifesto which made a reference to a customs union. I stood on a manifesto which made a reference to a customs union because I and the party opposite both believed we should be able to have an independent trade policy. It continues to be my view that we should have an independent trade policy in the future.
Mr. Patterson.
Speaker,
The European Commission today said that all preparations for no deal had been completed, and last week in the statement the Parliamentary Under-Secretary for DEXU made clear that very good progress was being made on the UK front in preparation for no deal. So it's a bit surprising, Mr. Speaker, to hear from the Prime Minister that Northern Ireland is unable to prepare properly because it hasn't got devolved government. Which areas of government activity present a problem, and when will they be resolved?
I say to my right honourable friend, it is the Northern Ireland Civil Service do not have the powers to take the necessary decisions that would be needed in a circumstance in which there was a no deal and the UK left the European Union with a no deal. Now, it is possible to address those issues, but that had not been done by the 29th of March. The question about the impact on Northern Ireland and where there was no devolved government was an important one. And I believe that it's absolutely right that the government took the view that it was not appropriate to allow that no deal to go ahead at a time when the powers were not in place to ensure proper exercise of the decision-making necessary in a no deal situation.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Speaker, but just on that last point, the Prime Minister has known for some considerable time, and so has the House, that the 29th of March was the target date. So why hasn't appropriate preparations been made? Why do we need another 2 weeks? What's going to happen in another 2 weeks that couldn't have happened up to now? I mean, this is a fundamental lack of preparation, and the government's entirely responsible for that, if that's the case, because this is a new argument. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, this is an entirely new argument that we're hearing for the first time as to why we need extension. But could I ask the Prime Minister, further to the question that the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland raised, someone with great experience, having served, I think, 4 years in Northern Ireland, who raises the point that Leo Varadkar has made it clear that in terms of a no deal, that he is very confident there will be no border checks. Michel Barnier has said the same. Angela Merkel has said the same. She shakes her head, but that's what he said. That's what he said. So the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that this backstop problem, which has been elevated, one has to ask, and I'd like the Prime Minister's views on this, why is it that the EU insists on this when, in the case of a no deal, it doesn't need to have any checks? And why is it that the Prime Minister ever agreed to this backstop in the first place, which is the thing that bedevils her agreement?
Can I say first of all to the right honourable gentleman that actually the issue of the positioning governments of Northern Ireland in a no-deal situation, it's not the first time that it's been raised today. It was raised by my right honourable friend, the DEFRA Secretary, in the debate on no deal, which took place nearly 2 weeks ago. In relation to the question of the border checks in Northern Ireland, I would simply say to the right honourable gentleman, a number of statements are made and have been made from individuals about the situation in relation to the border in Northern Ireland. What is also clear that actually when you look at the detail of what the European Union has said, they have not said, they've made clear that European Union law would need to be adhered to in any circumstance in which there was no deal. We ourselves have said, and the right honourable gentleman is aware of this, that we would ensure that we were moving towards a period of time for a temporary period, because of the legal situation it could only be for a temporary period, of having minimal checks with exceptions. But the legal position is a different one in relation to the necessity to be able to have certain checks taking place. And the European Union has been clear that EU law would need to be applied in all of these circumstances.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To carry on with that point that has just been raised, is the Prime Minister suggesting that in order for Northern Ireland to be ready to leave with no deal, there would need to be some form of direct decision-making by us in this House in the absence of a Stormont government?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. If there is no Stormont government, if powers are needed and ministerial direction is needed, which is not available to the civil servants currently, it would require some form of direct application of powers here from this Westminster.
Angela Regal.
Speaker, the Prime Minister appears to have ruled out bringing back her deal for an indefinite amount of time, and yet we only have 2 weeks before we crash out without a deal. She said that she won't necessarily take notice of this House's indicative vote process, and she's also said that she will not continue as Prime Minister if we remain in the EU beyond June the 30th. This seems to be pointing directly to a prime ministerial dash for no deal. Will she actually say that that is not what she wants and tell us when she's going to abandon her deal rather than just keep postponing the vote on it?
I have always been clear that I want us to leave the European Union. My preference is for us to leave the European Union with a deal. But I have always also been clear, and it is a very simple, logical fact, that it isn't possible simply to say from honourable members that they don't want no deal. If they're going to leave the European Union, then we have to have a deal if we're not going to leave without a deal.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Given that the deal that is on offer now is exactly the same as the deal that was on offer a week ago, why does the Prime Minister think that you, Mr. Speaker, would allow it to be voted upon in this session?
Can I say to my honourable friend that I'm very clear of the strictures that the Speaker gave when he made his statement last week, and that were we to bring forward a further motion to this House, we would of course ensure that that further motion met with the requirements that the Speaker had made.
Joanna Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes it's hard to believe what one hears in this House these days, but we have it written down in black and white here that the Prime Minister said this afternoon that she cannot commit to delivering the outcome of any votes held by this House. What's the point? Does she realise that this makes a mockery of parliamentary democracy? Yeah. And will she reconsider and commit to holding a binding vote to avoid a no-deal Brexit?
To the honourable lady, that it's a very simple position. An indicative vote is exactly that, an indicative vote. I'm sure the members of this House cannot expect the government simply to give a blank cheque to any vote that was that came through. For example, the SNP position is that they would like to see this House voting to revoke Article 50. This government's position is that we should deliver on the referendum result that took place in 2016 and deliver Brexit.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, you have told us in the dispatch box on 108 separate occasions that we would leave the European Union on the 29th of March. You have told the House it's now the 12th of April. But you have not changed your mind about ruling out a second referendum, unlike your Chancellor, who on Ridge yesterday effectively opened the door to it. Have you said anything to the Chancellor about this? Or has collective responsibility on your watch completely collapsed?
I think the Chancellor of the Exchequer made the point that this was one of the propositions. It is indeed one of the propositions that has been put forward. It's been referenced in questions already. It's been referenced by members across this House. But I assure my honourable friend that I have not changed my view about it. As I indicated earlier, I believe we should deliver on the result of the first referendum.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister speaks of the frustration felt by MPs. Does the Prime Minister accept that that frustration is born out of her intransigence, which is the greatest barrier to getting a deal? Following up from the question from my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, if you don't get a deal through Parliament by this Friday, then in 18 days' time, by the 12th of April, we will have to decide whether we want a longer extension or whether we want to crash out without a deal. Given that Parliament has voted twice already not to leave without a deal, will you confirm that by the 12th of April you will seek that longer extension and abide by the wishes of this Parliament?
to the honourable lady that she's absolutely right in the results of the council meeting that took place last week. If we can guarantee Brexit and leave on the 22nd of May by agreeing a deal this week, if we fail to do that, then we will have to look, and we've been clear about the commitment to facilitate seeing whether there is a majority across this House for anything. But the government cannot be expected simply to say that anything that comes through the government will accept. We all stood on manifestos. We all have positions in relation to our duty to deliver on the referendum. And I think that's important, and we should keep that in our minds.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has accepted that the House is going to have so-called indicative votes to try to find if there's a majority for a way forward, but she has twice now, I think, declined to commit the government to giving effect to a majority in this House, citing the fact that she stood on a manifesto which she thinks should guide things. May I remind her that that manifesto only appeared halfway through the election campaign. I don't think it was discussed in Cabinet. It was not circulated to the candidates who were already fighting their campaigns, and nothing in that manifesto in Europe played any part in the general election campaign. We're all being asked to show pragmatism, flexibility and put the national interest first. Can I ask her to be prepared to bend from her commitment to the manifesto, apart from the one proposal that she dropped fairly promptly when the manifesto first appeared?
To my right honourable and learned friend, first of all, I don't accept the entire description that he set out there. But can I just say to my right honourable friend, I think we have looked in the whole process of negotiation. There has been compromise, but I don't think my right honourable and learned friend was a respected and long-standing member of previous governments. And I suspect that if my right honourable and learned friend had been standing at this dispatch box prior to the possibility of indicative votes, and we have to see the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will make a reference, obviously, to the government's position when he speaks, and further explanation when he speaks later this afternoon. But if my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset's amendment passes, then of course there will be those indicative votes. But if my right honourable and learned friend was standing here as a government minister, I don't think he would give a blank cheque. I think he is indicating his assent with what I'm suggesting.
Kate Hoey.
The Prime Minister has said once again that the European Union are not going to, under any circumstances, look again at the withdrawal agreement. So I actually agree with her that indicative votes are a nonsense, because actually, in the end, they are talking about the future relationship and not about the withdrawal agreement. But can I say to her now, why will she not start preparing properly for, and I don't call it a no deal, it's not a no deal, it's a different type of deal that would take us out from, it's a WTO deal. Why will she not continue to prepare for that and to make sure that in the end, what really matters is the people's vote, not what this Parliament says?
Say to the right honourable lady that I hope I've expressed my belief that we should be delivering on the result of the 2016 referendum. Can I also say to the right honourable lady we continue to prepare for no deal. Those preparations are being continued.
Mr. Stephen Crabb.
I've heard many colleagues on the other side of the House say that they oppose the deal, not because they don't support the terms of the withdrawal agreement. In fact, many of them go to pains to say they do support the terms of the withdrawal agreement, but because they have problems with the political declaration. Has the Prime Minister considered providing this House with an opportunity to have votes on the terms of the withdrawal agreement and then on the political declaration to enable us to come to a view about whether the terms of our departure are acceptable to a majority of the House?
Say to my right honourable friend that, of course, throughout the debate that we've had previously, one of the concerns that many people across the House have raised was about the political declaration and the fact that it wasn't legal text, and a concern to, if you like, tie it down further, which is what we did do in our discussion with the European Union. But I'm sure my right honourable friend has also seen the terms of the terms of the Council conclusions, but we've always worked to ensure that the political declaration could be firmed up, if one likes, to describe it as such, to give greater confidence in that sort of future relationship.
Very good indeed to see the honourable gentleman member for Wolverhampton South East back in his place and manifestly in rude health. Mr Pat McFadden.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Pitching Parliament against the people undermines parliamentary democracy and feeds the far right. Does the Prime Minister regret her use of words last Wednesday night?
First of all, can I echo the Speaker's comments to say how good it is to see the right honourable gentleman back in his place. I was trying to make a very simple point last week, which is that this is a moment of decision for Parliament. We gave the people the choice. The people gave their decision. Parliament needs to deliver on that decision, and the time has come for Parliament to decide.
Sarah Newton.
I very much agree with my right honourable friend. This is the moment for Parliament to decide. And while I would very happily vote for the withdrawal agreement and the future declaration for a third time, other colleagues won't. So could my right honourable friend give us a bit more information about how the government is going to enable the House to come to a solution for a Plan B so she can go back to the EU and make sure that we deliver on what all of us said we would do in this House, well, the main political parties said that they would do, and that is deliver Brexit with a deal.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her question, and the opportunity will come for the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster in the debate that follows this statement to set out in a little more detail how the government sees the processes going forward over the next few days. It is, of course, the case that the European Union Council has made clear that the withdrawal agreement does remain closed and will not be reopened. And it's against that background, of course, that Parliament would look at any options that it brought forward.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I can say, and I think on behalf of a lot of honourable and right honourable members, I was proud to march with the people. Those 1 million people from all over the United Kingdom, of all backgrounds and all generations, that came to London on a precious Saturday because they want this matter to go back to the people. Mr Speaker, the people of this country are crying out for leadership, and businesses are crying out for certainty. And in this Prime Minister, they are not getting either of those things. The Prime Minister was asked twice now by honourable members, right honourable members, on this side of the House, come April the 12th, if her withdrawal agreement has not been passed by this House, what is her plan B? Because she still hasn't told us, Mr Speaker. Is it going to be no deal or a lengthy extension? Prime Minister, just answer the question.
Can I point out to the right honourable lady, she talks about the response of business. Business was very clear that it wanted this House to support the deal. Yes, business was very clear that it wanted the House to support the deal. When we get to the point, you see, some members, honourable members and right honourable members, are saying to me, the government should say now, what will you do on the 11th of April? Others are saying, listen to the House and do whatever the House says on the 11th of April. These two are not entirely compatible.
Sir Edward Lee.
Has the Prime Minister noted the fourth section of the European Council conclusions, which state any unilateral commitment, statement or other act should be compatible with the letter and spirit of the withdrawal agreement? In noting the words any and should and the tense of this conclusion, does the Prime Minister conclude with me that it would be legally enforceable and allowable for the United Kingdom to give further interpretation on a unilateral declaration to reassure colleagues on our ability to exit the backstop?
Right honourable friend is right to draw attention to that conclusion. There are certain commitments which we, unilateral commitments, we've made unilateral commitments in relation to Northern Ireland. We've indicated we're prepared to make those unilateral commitments. And certainly that my right honourable friend has raised before this question of the application of international law, and we are looking again at how we can reflect that properly in any papers that are brought forward.
Mary Cray.
Minister's deal has been rejected twice, and no deal has been rejected twice by this Parliament, and yet she stands here today threatening that we leave with no deal on April the 12th if her deal is not approved this week, and saying that she will whip her colleagues tonight to vote against the very process for which the EU has granted that extension. We are now in the levels of theatre of the absurd. 1 million people stood in Parliament Square demanding their right to be heard. If MPs can have 3 votes in 3 months, why can't the people have 2 votes in 3 years?
Can I say to the right honourable lady that there are 2 ways in which the extension has been granted by the European Union Council. The first, of course, is for us to exit on the 22nd of May with a deal, if this House were to agree a deal this week. The second is to provide for a possibility of the United Kingdom going forward to the European Union with some plan as to take that forward if the deal has not been agreed. I indicated in my statement why it is the case that the government will be whipping against the amendment in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset. And there are elements about this issue of Brexit, but there are also elements about the precedent that sets for the future, for the relationship between this House and the Executive.
O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I voted for the withdrawal agreement before, and I will willingly back to the Prime Minister and vote for it again. But I owe it to my constituents that if that should not pass, I have the opportunity to debate in full the alternatives. The Prime Minister urges us against the so-called let-win proposal, if I may put it that way, tonight, but says the government will bring time for alternatives to be considered. But can I press her again, as my honourable friend, the member for Truro and Falmouth did? Well, if that's to be the case, when?
I was going to say to my honourable friend, I hope that he would have a little more patience, because the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will set out more details on this in relation to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will set out more details in relation to this. We stand by the commitment that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster gave in this House, that if it were the case that we had not, we're in the position of not having got a deal through, then in the 2 weeks after the European Union Council, that the government would facilitate that opportunity for people to look at the other options.
Peter Kyle.
The Prime Minister has accused MPs of wasting time and playing games, but can I just remind her, it wasn't MPs that made her sign Article 50 before she was ready for the negotiations. It wasn't MPs that made her call a general election in the middle of the Article 50 process. It wasn't MPs that made her burn through 3 Brexit secretaries in 2 years. And it wasn't MPs that made her set red lines that could never pass this House. She has spoken consistently about compromise, but what she really has meant is capitulation. If she is really in the mood for compromise now, can I urge her to meet with those of us who are truly trying to work through and get a compromise to this place that can work for her and us?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I think I've said in this House before that I'm happy to meet with him and other members of this House, which I have, and I have been meeting, and as the Leader of the Opposition indicated, I met with him earlier this afternoon. But can I also just remind, I have indicated that I am happy to meet members of this House to discuss these issues. But can I also remind the honourable gentleman, when he refers to triggering Article 50, this House voted to trigger Article 50. When he refers to the general election, actually the House voted for the general election.
Rachel McLean.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister confirm that it is not the government's intention to hold European parliamentary elections? Because my constituents in Redditch, who voted to leave the EU nearly 3 years ago, would find that completely Unacceptable.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I absolutely agree. I think people would ask what on earth we were doing if we, having voted to leave the EU nearly 3 years ago, then found themselves electing members to the European Parliament. But of course, the way in which we can ensure that we don't have to do that is to ensure we leave the European Union by the 22nd of May, and that is only possible if a deal is agreed this week.
Stephen Doughty.
Speaker, like many other members of this House, I was proud to walk alongside the over 1 million people in the streets on Saturday. And I walked along at one point alongside 2 youngsters and their family, and they were carrying a banner that said, "Votes PM3, People 1." Now, this is a very, very fundamental point. Can the Prime Minister explain to all the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of young people up and down this country why she gets to have multiple votes on a deal that's been rejected by this House and is not supported by the country, and why the people don't get a chance to say whether they want to go ahead with a deal that this House can agree on?
That's right. Say to the honourable gentleman, this House votes on many occasions on many different issues. This House, one of the things this House voted on was to ask the people of this country whether or not we should leave the European Union. The people gave that decision. At the time, the government said it would abide by that decision, that it was not an advisory decision. It was effectively an instruction to this House. It was a duty of this House to be able to abide by that, and that's what we should be doing.
Crispin Blunt.
Does the Prime Minister understand that by taking no deal off the table at the behest of this Remainer Parliament, she has just put the final torpedo into her own deal and any real prospect of Brexit, and that her statement will represent the most shameful surrender by a British leader since Singapore in 1942?
Can I simply say to my right honourable friend that what I said in my statement was that this House has voted twice to reject no deal and may very well continue to vote to reject no deal, and may very well, as a House, attempt to ensure that no deal cannot take place. As the SNP have already indicated, they will be moving a vote to revoke Article 50, which would be to reverse the whole result of the referendum. I continue to want, and I also might point out to my right honourable friend that members opposite have been complaining that I have refused in my answers to take no deal off the table. The reality is that this House has shown its intention to do everything it can to take no deal off the table, and we all need to recognise that if we're going to deliver on Brexit, then we need to recognise that situation.
Sammy Wilson.
Prime Minister, the current difficulty which you face all hangs around the withdrawal agreement and the way in which Northern Ireland has been pulled into these discussions. This weekend, the Irish Government have made it quite clear that the whole premise of the withdrawal agreement is based on a foundation of sand. There will be no checks along the Irish border, therefore no threat to peace in Northern Ireland, therefore no disruption to the island of Ireland. And now today we're told that it's because Northern Ireland is not prepared. Yet all of the preparations which are done by central government apply to Northern Ireland. All of them apply to Northern Ireland. When are you going to stop using Northern Ireland as an excuse? And do you realise that the importance of this agreement to delivering Brexit and also to the unity of the United Kingdom is such that we will not be used in any scare tactics to push this through?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that what I have genuinely been trying to achieve through everything that I have been doing is ensuring that we respect the wishes of the people of Northern Ireland and we respect Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom. Now, it is the case, as I say, that these remarks about the border have been made by, I think I'm right in saying, by the Taoiseach and others previously, and then they've been contradicted by the European Commission in terms of what might be necessary. So I merely say, well, the situation in relation to the European Union's proposal is that it's been very clear about European Union laws and the necessity of those EU laws being applied.
Order. I have no wish to distract from the importance of the matters, but there's been quite a lot of naughty behaviour this afternoon, including by the Honourable Gentleman Member for East Antrim and the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Rayleigh in Wickford, in repeatedly using the word "you," which is unparliamentary. So I am looking to a custodian of our fine traditions of parliamentary courtesy, and I need look no further than Victoria Prentice.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know about you, but I think that the 2017 Conservative Manifesto is possibly not bedtime reading in many households. So let me remind the House briefly. We want to agree a deep and special partnership with the European Union. This partnership will benefit both the European Union and the United Kingdom. While we are leaving the European Union, we are not leaving Europe, and we want to remain committed partners and allies to our friends. Does the Prime Minister think that any of the indicative votes which we may be able to cast on Wednesday, aside from that on the meaningful vote on the withdrawal agreement, will be covered by that manifesto? And if so, will she whip us to vote in any particular way?
Well, my honourable friend is tempting me to indicate what we might do. We don't know what the options are. We don't know what the options that will be chosen or the sequence in which those will be chosen. But she's absolutely right to point out that we stood on a particular manifesto. We stood on a manifesto to honour the result of the referendum. The Labour Party stood on a manifesto to honour the result of the referendum. I think there is a way to honour the result of the referendum, and it's a pity we haven't been able to agree that.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister talks of frustration with Parliament. She also today, on a number of occasions, has said today is decision time. But given that she is not putting her deal to another vote, and she is preventing this House and not allowing this House to have indicative votes, could she advise us on how we are to express our decision?
First of all, can I say to the Honourable Lady that actually what I said was, as things stand, I wasn't bringing the meaningful vote back, but I continue to have discussions with colleagues across the House to build support so we can bring the vote forward this week and guarantee Brexit. The process, in the absence of a meaningful vote, in the absence of agreeing the deal this week, the process will be referred to by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in the debate that will take place after this statement. And, of course, there is the amendment down by my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, which gives an indication and a timetable were that amendment to be passed. I will be whipping against that amendment for the reasons I set out earlier.
James Cartledge.
If we go to indicative votes and we look at other options, the issue of free movement is likely to feature. Now, I strongly agree with the Prime Minister that the public want us to end free movement, but must we not recognise that immigration into this country from outside the European Union is now running at a 15-year high of 261,000. That's more than Ipswich and Colchester combined. Should we not therefore have some candour and say to the public that if we end free movement, immigration is unlikely to fall, it will simply come from much further afield?
Can I say to my honourable friend, over time, the government has taken a number of actions to ensure that we can deal with introducing more control into our immigration system. That is one of the advantages of ending free movement, is that actually we can bring an entirely new immigration system into place, which enables it to be skills-based rather than based on where somebody has, the country that somebody comes from. But I also believe that what underpinned, for many people, what underpinned their vote and desire to leave the European Union was a desire to see free movement end, and that's why it is absolutely right that the proposals the government has put forward would indeed do that.
Seema Malhotra.
Speaker, the fact that the Prime Minister has had to ask EU leaders for an Article 50 extension last week was a highly predictable outcome from an inflexible Prime Minister who has consistently sought to sideline Parliament and the country over the last 2 years. So further to the question by the Right Honourable Member for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford, if through indicative votes this House votes, for example, in favour of a Norway-based deal or a customs union, will she shift her red lines in line with the will of this House? Or will we come out of this process and her constructive engagement to find that nothing has changed?
I answered in my statement. I set out the position of the government in relation to the indicative votes, and that remains the government's position.
Jeremy Lafroy. No harm done at all.
Mr. Speaker, further to the question from my right honourable friend for Pembroke Preseli, would the Prime Minister agree that there is perhaps a majority across this House for the withdrawal agreement on its own, given that there needs to be a little bit more work done on the terms of the backstop, and that actually the political declaration is very close to the manifestos of both the Conservative and the Labour Party in 2017, and again, with a little bit more work, there should be a majority with goodwill across this House for the agreement.
The honourable friend is right that there are those across this House who obviously have concerns, continuing concerns with the withdrawal agreement, but many across the House who do not have those concerns in relation to the withdrawal agreement, but who do have concerns about the certainty of the future in the political declaration. The political declaration does provide for a spectrum of options in relation to our trading relationship for the future. I think we certainly stood on a manifesto commitment to have that independent trade policy. We want to see that delivered in the agreement we have with the European Union, but others in this House also stood on a basis of having that independent trade policy, and moving into a permanent customs union does not deliver on that independent trade policy.
Chris Leslie.
May I just press the Prime Minister a little further on this notion she may scuttle any outcome of indicative votes because perhaps they're not negotiable with the European Union. She knows, because the Chancellor told us so yesterday, that a confirmatory referendum, a people's vote, is a perfectly viable proposition. I want to know, and I don't want to interrupt her while she's on her phone, but if she wouldn't mind... Well, she was on the phone, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, she was.
I'd like her to answer specifically whether she regards a confirmatory referendum as something which, if this House agreed it, she would also perhaps not abide by that particular outcome. Yes or no?
Right honourable gentleman, and I apologise to the honourable gentleman. Just a little bit of female multitasking trying to take place there. But I do think, because in terms of the confirmatory, the concept of the confirmatory vote, that is often attached not just to being a confirmatory vote, but actually to having Remain on the ballot paper, so that actually it is effectively a second referendum on whether or not we should leave the European Union. As I've indicated earlier, I believe we should be leaving the European Union because that's what people voted for in the first referendum.
Simon Hoare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While we must leave the EU, to do so without a deal would decimate agriculture in North Dorset, which is why I have supported the Prime Minister's deal on both occasions and will do so again whenever she asks me to. However, she's indicated that the statutory instrument to confirm the extension to the withdrawal period has been laid before the House. Could she advise when it will be debated and voted upon?
It will be debated and voted upon later this week. I think I can inform my honourable friend, obviously, that I'm happy to inform my honourable friend outside of this statement when I've checked which day, but it will be debated on one day later this week.
Emma Reynolds.
Speaker, the Prime Minister says in her statement that she cannot commit the government to delivering the outcome of any votes in this House. So if her deal fails to get through this week, and if we hold indicative votes and a majority of MPs vote for an alternative to her deal, is she really saying that she is going to ignore the democratic will of this House and she would prefer to crash out without a deal than respect the will of this House?
First of all, say, if the honourable lady will permit me, I have just checked, and in fact it will be Wednesday that the statutory instrument will be debated on. Can I say to the honourable lady that it's not... look, this House has passed motions saying that it does not want no deal. It may very well pass more motions saying that it does not want no deal. But if it is going to deliver on ensuring that it does not have no deal, then it has to agree a deal. It is very simple. It isn't enough simply to say that the House doesn't want no deal.
Mr. David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister inadvertently failed to answer the second part of the question of my honourable friend, the member for Stone. Can she please say when the order will be, the commencement order will be made under the provisions of Section 25, subsection 4 of the Withdrawal Act? This, as she will know, is a matter of particular importance.
Yes, and I apologise for not answering the question to my honourable friend, the member for Stone. And if my right honourable friend will permit me, I will confirm that point and come back to my both of my honourable friends when I'm able to do that.
Chris Stevens.
Speaker, given the political crisis the Prime Minister faces, does she think it would be better if the Cabinet met in public, given that all the details are diligently being leaked to the media on every single occasion? But does that not always suggest that the Cabinet is also in deadlock, and the only way to break this impasse is either a second referendum or a general election?
I think the honourable gentleman has heard my answers to the question on the second referendum on many occasions, and I continue to believe that it is not in the best interests of this House. I think it's in the best interests of this House to agree for us to deliver on Brexit, to do it in a smooth and orderly way, and not to go down the route of either a second referendum or a general election.
Luke Graham.
Mr. Speaker, I voted for the withdrawal agreement twice before, and I would do so again. But can I actually say that I welcome my right honourable friend's movement? I welcome my right honourable friend's movement towards indicative votes, because I think they will be helpful. And can my right honourable friend confirm that there will be a full range of workable options, including EFTA, so that we can debate and actually decide in this House?
Yep. Can I say to my honourable friend, I think it is the purpose of any such votes is to determine the views of this House, and I think it's appropriate for this House to bring the options forward that it wishes to see being debated.
Caroline Flint.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's time that we recognise that beyond those who are polarised, both in this place and outside, the overwhelming number of members across this House, but also across the British public, want us to come to some sort of compromise and move on and move forward. There are, for some people, no deal is going to be ever good enough, either those who want to crash out with no deal or those who want to overturn the referendum. And it's already been said that actually in many parts there is agreement with the withdrawal agreement, but there are concerns about the future relationship on trade and also security going forward. So could I ask the Prime Minister, could she assure the House today that if we do agree the withdrawal agreement, and I've voted for it once because I think it's the right thing for my constituents and the country to move on, that in the next stage, when we get into the detailed discussions around trade and other matters, this House will have to be able to, in detail, explore what those options are, be able to debate them and vote on them.
To the right honourable lady, that first of all I agree with the sentiment that she's expressed, that I think most members of the public certainly want to see this resolved and want to see us able to move on. In relation to the future relationship, there are differences of opinion across the House, around the House, about the nature of that future trade relationship, but I've already indicated, as I did a while back, that in the next stage of negotiations there will be a greater involvement for members of this House than there was in the first stage of negotiations.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, I haven't yet met a constituent who envies the Prime Minister her task of trying to deliver us leaving the European Union responsibly. But quite apart from the concerns of manufacturing and farming and the clear view of this House, does my right honourable friend agree with me that in the absence of a political agreement between the parties of Northern Ireland to govern that country, it would be irresponsible for any government to push ahead with no deal? And if she does agree that, is that absolutely clear to all members of the House, especially on this side, so that we can focus on what the advantages of her proposals are?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point, and it is about the responsibility to ensure that we do have appropriate governance in a situation in a no-deal situation, where significant decisions would need to be made. And it is entirely right and proper, I think, that the government has taken the position that it has in relation to that matter.
Christine Jardine.
The Prime Minister has told this House on numerous occasions that she is committed to delivering the will of the people as it was expressed almost 3 years ago now. But given that 1 million people took to the streets at the weekend that more than 5.5 million have signed a petition, and everyone who's ever sat on these benches knows that the will of the British people can change. Would the Prime Minister not agree with me that perhaps the time has come to check that the will of the British people has not, in fact, changed, and that perhaps they want something different from they wanted 3.5 years ago?
Can I just say to the Honourable Lady that I have answered this question on a number of occasions now, and I refer her to the answer I gave earlier.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister's deal is not to come back before the House, I believe it is vitally important that this House has the opportunity to consider across parties what it can agree on. The Prime Minister has kindly indicated that parliamentary time will be given over for that process. But can she indicate, notwithstanding that we're going to be getting a statement from the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, can she herself indicate, as Prime Minister, by when those votes will take place?
The first point to make, of course, although I've indicated we would whip against the amendment from my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, is that if his amendment were passed, then that would lead to certainly some votes taking place on Wednesday of this week. The commitment that the government has made is that over this week and next week, there would be opportunities. That was what my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, indicated, that in the 2 weeks following last week's European Union Council, we would facilitate the opportunity for the House to make those decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As someone who's not DUP or ERG or from a Leave seat, can I thank the Prime Minister for the dear colleague letter that she sent me, which has the offer of a meeting in it. When she came to Ealing Central and Acton in 2017, it had a 200 majority. She had hopes of taking it back. Today, in that same seat, there are more people who've signed a petition to unilaterally rescind Article 50, never mind people's vote, than voted Conservative in that same election. Wow. If she is serious, could she meet with me so we can thrash out a way forward and that London is not lost forever? Because otherwise it seems she's just listening all the time to the same old voices.
As I indicated in response earlier to a question from the Honourable Lady's honourable friend, I'm always happy. I have been meeting members from across the House, and I'm very happy to meet members to discuss these matters.
Eve Double.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I need to tell the Prime Minister that, having spent time in my constituency this weekend, I have spoken to many constituents who took her at her word when she said we would be leaving the EU at the end of March, and now feel disappointed, disillusioned and even betrayed that that is not happening. So can she reassure my constituents that she is absolutely determined to do everything in her power to ensure we leave the EU and we leave it as soon as possible?
I say to my honourable friend, I regret not being able to deliver on Brexit on the 29th of March. I had genuinely wanted to be able to do that. And can I confirm to my honourable friend that I think it is important that we do deliver Brexit, that we do deliver on that vote that people took. I want to see that, obviously, if we're going to do that with a withdrawal agreement that has been put into legislation, that takes time. That's why the extension to the 22nd of May was agreed at the European Council. But I want to make sure that we do leave and we do deliver on the wishes of the people.
Maskell.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has yet to explain why she expects MPs to change their mind over a matter of 2 weeks, as opposed to the people of the country to change their mind over a matter of 3 years. Can she explain that to the House?
The members of this House have been expressing their views in a whole variety of ways and will continue to do so over the coming weeks. But as I've said and I've indicated to this members earlier, so they will not be surprised at this position, I do think it is important that we deliver on the vote that took place in 2016. And I also, can I just say to the Honourable Lady that those who think that if a second referendum took place and came to a different decision, I presumably would then say, regardless of whether people said they were changing their minds from that, that decision should be held. But actually many people would say, why is it that we have failed to do what the British people asked us to do?
Anne-Marie Trevelyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to be able to support the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement, but I continue to have concerns about the backstop and our lack of control of it should it kick in. But I hope very much that when the Prime Minister brings back for a third vote, there will be enough change in it for me to be able to do so. In the meantime, though, Mr Speaker, could the Prime Minister confirm that she will indeed put the commencement order down so that we can, if we need to, have 12th April as a no-deal departure date? Because that was never placed for the 29th of March, and that means we have no pressure point with which to encourage colleagues to support when it comes back.
As I've said in response to questions from our right honourable and honourable friends earlier, I will come back to my honourable friend on this specific point about the commencement order.
Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Prime Minister think it constructive were we able to secure a single majority view out of the indicative votes process, or would she prefer further indecision?
I've indicated earlier that we cannot, government isn't giving a blank cheque to the indicative votes process. It's important, and it is perfectly possible that the House may come to a decision, the House may come to contradictory decisions, the House may come to no decision at all, and we will obviously have to engage constructively with whatever comes out of those votes.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I share the Prime Minister's scepticism about the indicative vote procedure. Indeed, I would go further and say it's a complete waste of time. I'm sure that some who are proposing it are genuine in their desire to find a way through, but in actual fact, the majority, I think, actually wants to thwart the result of the referendum. I've been out in my constituency over the weekend, and as she knows, it's a 70% Brexit supporting area. But like me, most of them, when I explain it, are prepared to back the Prime Minister's deal, imperfect though it is. But they do fear that there may yet be further concessions. Can she give an absolute assurance that she and the whole government will not agree to anything that further delays Brexit beyond a few weeks?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, and I want to be able to deliver Brexit and to do it within the extension that's been given us to the 22nd of May. Any further extension would require us to stand in European parliamentary elections. I think, as I said earlier, I think people will ask what on earth we were doing if having voted nearly 3 years ago to leave the European Union, we then found they were then being asked to elect members to the European Parliament. I think they would say that we were failing to deliver on the vote that they gave, and I believe we have a duty to do that.
Phil Wilson.
Mr Prime Minister, I genuinely believe that the people have the right to compare any Brexit deal with the promises that were made in 2006. It is their right to have the final say in this process. But I know how much work the Prime Minister is put in to get another deal across the line. And in the spirit of compromise, I would help facilitate the passage of that deal, indeed any deal, to get it over the line, as long as it goes back to the British people. Can I ask the Prime Minister to meet with myself and my friend from Hove to discuss the compromise that we think is the way out of this, because whatever the result of that ballot, we will not bring this country together until we've held it.
I say to the honourable gentleman, as I've indicated to his honourable friend and others, that I'm happy to meet members of the House to discuss these matters. I know that the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union has already met the honourable gentleman and talked about this issue. I continue to have the reservations and the concerns that I've expressed previously in relation to these matters of the confirmatory vote. But as I've said, I'm happy to meet honourable members of the House.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Almost 3 years ago, every household in my constituency, like the rest of the country, was sent a leaflet paid for by the taxpayer from the government advocating that we remain, but also, crucially, saying that the results would be honoured. 3 years on, and with a general election where 589 members of Parliament were elected on a promise to deliver Brexit, and with the European Withdrawal Act now law from last year, is it not within her power to now deliver Brexit? Because that is the message that I clearly get from my constituents that they want now achieved.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I thank him for reminding the House that in that government leaflet it did indeed say that we would abide by the result of the referendum, and as he said, that something like 80% of members of this House were elected on the basis that they would honour the result of the referendum, and I think that's absolutely what we should be doing. I think the concern the point I was making earlier in relation to a number of matters is that, of course, this House has already indicated ways in which it does not want to see Brexit being delivered, by voting against no deal, and may continue to do so. And of course, we could very well see the House trying to ensure that that solution is not delivered. I'm very clear: we need to deliver Brexit. We need to deliver it because we promised people we would.
Caroline Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, why is the Prime Minister incapable of accepting the principle that democracy is a process, not a single one-off event? Because over the last almost 3 years, opinion poll after opinion poll have shown that people do want to have a final say on whatever deal comes out of this place. And before she answers that that might lead to a third or a fourth referendum, she knows perfectly well that that is the beauty of the Kyle Wilson Amendment, precisely that whatever the result of going back to the people on the deal that comes out of this place will go straight into law, so it will be an end of it. Why will she not accept that?
Well, I've answered this question on a number of occasions. Well, I have answered this question on a number of occasions. I think it is very important, and I think when I met the Honourable Lady, she indicated she would want to see Remain on the ballot paper as well as the deal. She's not asking for confirmation of the deal in relation to leaving the European Union, but actually questioning people and going back and saying, well, we asked you the question, you gave us an answer, but actually we're not sure that's the right one. Have another go.
Sir Desmond Swain.
If decisions and powers have to be taken here in order to remedy the current unreadiness of Northern Ireland, is there a plan to deal with that in good time for the 12th of April?
Prime Minister.
Yes.
Mr. Edward Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think I might surprise the Prime Minister by saying there's something I welcome in her statement. She said in her statement, unless this House agrees to it, no deal will not happen. So can she confirm that if this House continues, as it has so far, to vote against no deal, she will not seek to take us out of the European Union on April the 12th without a deal?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, if we are not going to leave the European Union without a deal, then we need to clearly have a deal which enables us to leave the European Union. It is very simple. I've made the point on a number of occasions, and I will continue to make it.
John Barron.
I gently remind the Prime Minister that, in law, this House has expressed a view, and that is to leave on the 29th of March with or without a deal. Given the constant assurances we've had about no-deal preparations, including an answer to my urgent question last week, may I urge her now to face down this Remain-dominated Westminster bubble and support leaving on no-deal WTO terms in order to honour not just the referendum result and indeed the triggering of Article 50, but also our own manifesto.
I say to my honourable friend that I do want to deliver Brexit. I do want to make sure that we leave. I continue to believe that leaving with a deal is better for is the best route for the United Kingdom. We are continuing with those no-deal preparations. My honourable friend will be aware of the results of the Council conclusions in relation to the extensions. I continue to believe that if it is possible to do so, we should leave on the 22nd of May, and that's the way of guaranteeing Brexit.
Heidi Allen.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister realise, when she so flippantly dismisses calls for a confirmatory public vote or second referendum, she's just like that dismissing the million-odd people who marched on Saturday, the 5.5 million and rising number of people who signed the petition to revoke Article 50? She says it would undermine democracy, but she does realise that democracy isn't indefinitely owned by the people who voted that day in the referendum. It's not owned by the government, it's certainly not owned by the Conservative Party, and it is most definitely no longer owned by the Prime Minister. Our country's future is owned by the people. Does she not realise it is no longer her decision to make? Now, Parliament, it's our turn. And following that, this decision absolutely must go back to the British people.
Can I remind the Honourable Lady that actually Parliament has already had a vote in relation to a second referendum, and Parliament rejected the concept of a second referendum in that vote.
Mr. Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker, for 2 years we have heard the opinions of MPs in this place, the majority of whom, sadly, do not want to leave the EU or want it watered down to the extent that, in fact, we really haven't. That is the problem the Prime Minister is dealing with. Prime Minister, what about the people of this country who voted overwhelmingly to leave LEAVE, the EU? Can she assure me that that's what we will do? If it takes to April the 12th, so be it. But on that date, if a deal cannot be agreed, we leave the EU as we promised the people of this country.
Can I say to my honourable friend, I want to deliver on the vote of those 17.4 million people to leave the European Union. I continue to believe that it is better to do so with a deal. We have the extension to the 22nd of May. We can guarantee Brexit by agreeing a deal and leaving on the 22nd of May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Prime Minister got a plan B, and if so, what is it?
Well, can I just say to the honourable gentleman and many of the other members of this House, on the one hand, people are asking me to listen to the House of Commons and to abide by the decision of the House of Commons, and then they're asking me to actually have a plan B, which could very well be different to the decision of the House of Commons. You can't have it both ways.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not recommending this to the Prime Minister, but has she got so fed up with this House of Commons and the way it's behaving that she just wants to pop over to Brussels and sign the withdrawal agreement anyway?
Can I say to my honourable friend, and he being an experienced member of this House, will know that in order to ratify the deal, we need to pass legislation through this House. So it's not quite as simple as he might like to think it would be.
Great idea, Peter.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Doesn't everything the Prime Minister said today indicate that she still believes that no deal is better than any other deal other than her own? And does she understand that this House will not permit her to allow this country to crash over the edge into a no-deal zone? So why doesn't she just state that clearly so that we can get on with the indicative votes?
I've dealt with the issue in relation to indicative votes. I have said that no deal is better than a bad deal. I happen to continue to believe that we did negotiate a good deal with the European Union. But I repeat the point to the honourable gentleman that I've made to others, that it's all very well wanting to say that the House doesn't want to leave with no deal, but the House then has to have something, agree something to put in its place.
Carol Monaghan.
Yes. Speaker, the Prime Minister is refusing to support a people's vote. She's also refusing to allow a second referendum on Scottish independence, despite the fact there has been a fundamental material change in circumstances. So if the Prime Minister is so sure of her position, why is she scared of trusting the people and putting it to democratic votes?
I just say to the honourable lady that if she believes in trusting the people, she should trust the result of the 2014 Scottish referendum.
John Woodcock.
Mr. Speaker, can I implore the Prime Minister not to believe that she can run down the clock to the extent that she puts her deal back to the Commons with days to go, and think that the members opposite, members across the House, will vote differently. If she brings it to the wire and makes a choice between her deal or no deal, she will usher in a period of economic chaos and political damage that will give succour to the extreme fringes of our politics on the left and right.
I say to the honourable gentleman, I want us to be able to leave the European Union in an orderly way, to deliver, to recognise the vote, to deliver on that Brexit, and do it in an orderly way, which, as I've said before, does protect our union and also protects jobs and livelihoods for people and protects our security. And that is what I will continue to work for.
Shannon.
Speaker, in a previous question to yourself, Prime Minister, I stated
clearly that Northern Ireland was never going to be the sacrifice for the withdrawal agreement. I felt the sacrifice then, as I feel the same now, and I refuse to play that role. So does the Prime Minister understand our determination to be treated as an integral part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? The failure to deliver the legally binding assurances and time-limited backstop continues to be the stumbling block and obstacle, and we must not, and we will not, Prime Minister, be treated differently from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we have, of course, been working with him and his colleagues to look at the ways in which we can ensure there is that commitment to the people of Northern Ireland that there will not be that different treatment. We were very clear with the European Union on the need to have a UK-wide customs territory in the backstop, not in Northern Ireland, only customs territory, and we continue to maintain our commitment to ensure that Northern Ireland is treated as an integral part of the United Kingdom.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister may recall, just a little over a week ago, I spoke to her at the door of this chamber and I begged her to dial down the hate, born not just out of the incessant abuse and threats that I receive, but for the millions of people in our country who are fearful. She responded on Wednesday evening with a despicable statement that, frankly, many of us felt put more of us and more of the public at risk. Being Prime Minister is a huge privilege, but with that privilege comes responsibility. So can she tell me today, how is she going to use her responsibility to dial down the hatred?
Can I say to the honourable lady that she and I indeed have a very serious conversation just outside this chamber over a week ago. As I said in my statement that I recognise I was expressing my frustration, that others have their frustration. Everybody has their frustrations in relation to this issue. I don't want to see anybody being the honourable lady, I genuinely don't. And she may recall that following our conversation, I actually took action to ensure that some of the things that she had said to me were properly looked into, because she has been subjected. Well, I did indeed do that. I want to see the people of this country feeling that this Parliament has been able to deliver for them. I think that is important for us, and that's what we will do. And I continue to believe that as we can carry this debate forward, we should indeed take care, and I will take care for the language that I use.
Conclude.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, I'm a former member of the European Parliament, a proud member of that Parliament. I'm ashamed of the way our Parliament has been behaving towards the European Parliament and the European community as a whole. One of my constituents has just sent me a message. If the deal, any kind of deal, goes ahead and we come out of the EU, my constituency is going to be poorer. The people there know that. And somebody has just sent me a message saying the Prime Minister is doing deals with all kinds of people. Why don't you ask her for the money we need in our area, of which we've been deprived? In fact, we just want to clear up 126 acres of contaminated land. It'll cost 12 million. Is the deal still open?
I say to the honourable lady, she'll be aware that we have indeed made some extra commitments in terms of some funding that is available to places across the country. We have also indicated that we recognise the fact that there have been funds available from the European Union for different parts of this country, and our Shared Prosperity Fund will be available to different parts of the country to deal with various issues that they reflect and the needs that they have.
Brendan O'Hara.
An honourable member from Dewsbury. In the past week, the Prime Minister has shown that there isn't a word too harsh that she won't say, there isn't a dog whistle too shrill that she will not blow, and that she is prepared to take the UK to the brink of catastrophe in order to get her own way. Can I ask the Prime Minister, when she reflects on the past 7 days, does she do so with a sense of pride, or does she do so with a deep sense of regret and shame?
I say to the honourable gentleman that what I want to do is to ensure, and what I'm working to do, and what I hope we will be able to achieve in this House, is to ensure that we deliver Brexit, that we do it in a way that enables us to protect our union and protect jobs and livelihoods and protect our security. That I believe should be the aim of everybody across this House, and I hope everybody will be able to come together and deliver that.
Michael Fabricant.
Since October, there has been extensive no-deal planning in the United Kingdom and in the European Union. This has been acknowledged not only by those in the UK and the EU, but also the Governor of the Bank of England. So I simply say to the Prime Minister, if I may, have faith, actually, in our officials. Let's try and get a deal, by all means, but if we cannot, let's not be frightened of a no deal.
Order. There's quite a lot of noise on the opposition benches. I assume the honourable gentleman had been present throughout. Yeah, no, that's fine. In that case, his intervention is perfectly orderly. He's been present throughout the statement, as I thought. Absolutely. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to my honourable friend, indeed, those no-deal preparations have been put in place and are continuing to be put in place. He expressed the wish for us to leave with a deal. I want to see us leaving with a deal. I think the point I made in my statement, though, is that this House has shown itself already on a number of occasions to want to try to ensure that we do not leave without a deal. I think the best route is to be able to leave with a deal, as I think my honourable friend indicated he did.
Tom Bray.
Speaker, Prime Minister, I went to an excellent cross-party briefing earlier today organised by the Cabinet Office on the subject of no deal, something I would recommend those who advocate no deal attend. It set out the extensive damage that no deal would do to the United Kingdom. So will the Prime Minister finally allow this House to pass a binding motion that rules out no deal?
To the right honourable gentleman, as he will know, the House has already passed, I think, 2 motions saying that it doesn't want to leave without a deal. The House will be having opportunities further to look at the options that lie ahead. But it continues to be... Well, the right honourable gentleman talks about the House passing a binding motion that we don't leave without a deal. But if we're going to leave, which he doesn't want to do, but I believe we should be doing, because people voted for that, then we need to... If we're not going to leave without a deal, we need to leave with a deal. And we need to agree the deal that we can leave with.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Doesn't this statement show the completely incoherent approach from the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister has just answered a question from the Liberal Democrat member with regards to no deal, and saying the only way to prevent a no deal is to back a deal. And yet her statement says, and she said it at the dispatch box, and I'll quote her statement, "Unless this House agrees to it, no deal will not happen." So what does she mean by that?
Hear, hear.
It's not just a statement I put in this statement, it's a statement that I have made previously. But I've also been very clear. This House may very well try to ensure that we do not leave without a deal. But the question to members at that point, if they wish to do that, is what is it that they then want to do? Do they want to leave with a deal? Or do some members of this House not want to leave at all, and we need to leave?
Chukaramuna.
Mr. Speaker, this is a parliamentary democracy, and it's quite clear that this Parliament will not approve her deal. If, through an indicative vote process, a majority forms behind an alternative way forward, and she does not then implement it, is it not the case that any shred of authority or credibility she has that remains with our EU partners will completely disappear? How on earth could she remain in office in those circumstances?
The honourable gentleman heard the response I've given earlier in relation to the government's position on indicative votes. We will engage constructively with those votes. It's possible that those votes will decide contradictory things. It's possible those votes will not decide anything at all. We will engage constructively.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know who advises the Prime Minister, but she says she will engage in it constructively, yet she's whipping against the idea of having it. She won't make any of it binding. As just, you know, an observer, it doesn't seem very constructive to me at all. But what did seem constructive was all the meetings that she had over the weekend and the men that she invited to those meetings. And what comes out this morning shows without any doubt to anyone anymore, if anyone even had any left, this is just some psychodrama in the Tory party. And every time I think that the Prime Minister does actually have duty, she totally disappoints me. This is about whether the member for Uxbridge can become the Prime Minister, and it's writ for all to see. This has got to end. So the question I ask the Prime Minister is that if we have indicative votes and we come up with a new way for the political declaration, how can she guarantee that any of that will happen? Because it won't be her.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that we are working to find a way to ensure that we can leave in a smooth and orderly way and we can deliver Brexit for the British people. I think that delivery of Brexit is what should be at the forefront of all our minds.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by paying tribute to the bravery of my honourable friend for Dewsbury and for the many other honourable members who've suffered lots of attacks over the last few months. The Prime Minister said in her statement this afternoon about what she said on Wednesday, "I expressed my frustration with our collective failure to make a decision." I don't think that's actually correct. No, it was an attack on members of Parliament doing their job, scrutinising the government at a time when tensions in the country are already heightened and MPs are accused of being traitors. Now, in my constituency, the majority of people who've asked me about this don't want me to vote for the Prime Minister's deal. So can the Prime Minister now do the right thing and apologise to members of Parliament for what she said on Wednesday evening?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, it was never my intention that what I said should have the sort of impact that she is talking about. And I regret if it did have that impact, because the point was a very simple one that I was trying to make, which is that we stand at a moment of decision for this House. It is an important moment. People have talked about responsibility. We all have responsibility of members of this House to make the decision that enables us to deliver Brexit for the British people.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister intend to lead the next phase of Brexit negotiations?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that I have always made clear that there is a job to be done and I am continuing to do that job.
Hugh Gaffney.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, under your watch, your deal has failed. The UK has seen austerity rise. Food banks have risen, and now we hear the government will delay the repeal of the Swedish deregulation, leaving thousands of agency staff financially worse off. So will Plan B include any resignations?
I point out to the honourable gentleman that we have employment at a record high, our debt is falling, our deficit is falling, and we've seen the strongest period of growth, quarterly growth of any country in the G7.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, after triggering of Article 50, the Prime Minister went during the Easter recess on a walking holiday. Does she have any plans to go on a walking holiday in April? And if so, will it begin at the end of next week when the recess is supposed to happen, or after the 12th of April?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I always look forward to the prospect of walking holiday, but obviously, with matters as they stand at the moment, my focus is on trying to ensure that we can deliver on Brexit and do that with a deal and getting the legislation through.
Paul Sweeney.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor of the Exchequer described the proposal to hold a ratification vote on the government's deal as perfectly coherent and worthy of consideration. Given that there have been efforts across the House to build consensus around this, would the Prime Minister at least agree that it is an idea worthy of consideration and it is coherent on the model of the Good Friday Agreement?
the Chancellor did indicate that this was one of the proposals that has come forward. I've indicated on a number of occasions, I've done it on many, in answer to a number of questions here in this House, that I continue to believe that we should deliver on the result of the first referendum.
Neil Gray.
Speaker, it wasn't the great irony of the Prime Minister's dictatorial Downing Street speech that by failing to accept her own responsibility for the mess that we are in, that we're unlikely to make any progress?
I say to the honourable gentleman, as I said earlier, I recognise the collective responsibility we have across this House in relation to the failure so far to get an agreement for a deal. I continue to believe that it's important to get agreement to a deal so that we can deliver Brexit in time.
Richard Burden.
Still not answered the question that was put to her quite a long time ago now by my right honourable friend for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford. She wasn't asked whether or not she approved of Britain being part of a customs union with the EU after Brexit. What she was asked was that if this House agreed through indicative votes to go for that option, would she abide by that decision, and would she seek to negotiate that with the European Union? Will she now answer that question?
Well, gentlemen, I answered the question about the government's position in relation to commitment on the indicative votes in the statement that I gave and in questions that followed.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to take the Prime Minister to the beautiful Misty Highlands, and in particular I'd like to take her to...
Object! Speak for yourself. Object!
In particular I'd like to take her to the Glenmore Hotel by Loch Ness, which by the way... which, by the way, is one of the best places to see the Loch Ness Monster. The Glenmore Hotel is having enormous trouble hiring EU seasonal workers this year. This is because they're not particularly encouraged to apply for jobs in the UK because of where we are right now in our history, and secondly because the unemployment rate in Inverness is considerably lower than the rest of the UK. We have a huge problem here that is right now, even before we know what we're doing, right now hitting the Highland economy. How does the government attempt to tackle this massive issue?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that I think it is actually the first time in this House that any honourable member has invited me to a hotel to spend some time with them, but we perhaps won't go there. Can I say to the honourable gentleman that I recognise the issues about, but we do have the high employment rates. The honourable gentleman references the high employment rate and low unemployment rate in Inverness. I think that is something to be celebrated. We are making sure through the policy that we're producing in relation to the future immigration system that we enable people to come into this country based on their skills, not on the country they come from. But of course, at the moment, we're still a member of the European Union, and it is possible, and we have guaranteed the rights of those EU citizens who come here and abide here.
Vera Hobhouse.
Speaker, I voted against her deal. Twice she voted against the people's vote. Mr. Speaker, I would have never thought that I would ever contemplate to vote for any Brexit deal because I'm passionately believing to stay in the European Union, and indeed the nearly 50% of the people who voted to stay in the European Union wouldn't expect me to do anything else. But I am prepared to vote for her deal if she is prepared to support a people's vote. Isn't that a true compromise?
I think I refer the honourable lady to the answer I gave earlier to that similar question.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister explain the mechanism by which a meaningful vote suddenly becomes a meaningless vote? And can I suggest to her that ignoring indicative votes or motions to note in this House is one thing, but when she ignores a meaningful vote, it shows a level of bad faith that is matched, frankly, only by her grotesque speech last week in Downing Street?
Say to the honourable gentleman that the House was very clear after the first meaningful vote that it wanted to see change in certain areas. The one thing the House has positively voted for was an agreement to leave with a deal with some changes to the withdrawal agreement. We did negotiate changes to the withdrawal agreement. We negotiated legally binding changes to the withdrawal agreement. The House did not accept those has not accepted those changes that were initiated. We continue to look, and I continue to talk to colleagues, because I continue to believe that it is better for this country to leave the European Union with a good deal.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has often said she considers the withdrawal agreement to be in the national interest. So, if she concluded that the only way that she could get support in this House for her deal would be to offer her resignation, would she, in the national interest, do that?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I think what this is about is actually making sure that we leave the European Union and do it in the way that is best for this country, and that's what the deal is about.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People are very concerned and very alarmed by this Brexit chaos in North Ayrshire and Arran, and indeed in the UK as a whole. This is a time of crisis, and the people of Scotland and across the UK are represented in these Brexit talks by a Prime Minister and a government which EU leaders at the weekend described as evasive and confused in the final days before Brexit. Does she think that description by EU leaders inspires confidence in those across the UK who are worried about Brexit?
What I hope people across the UK who are worried about Brexit will see is a government that is trying to ensure that we deliver on the vote of the British people, but do so in a way which protects their jobs, protects our union and protects their security.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yet again the Prime Minister displays her lack of self-awareness and her complete irony bypass. In her statement, she says if she cannot get her vote through, she'll work across the House to find a solution. Except then she tells us she'll block Parliament taking control and won't bind the government to accepting votes. And then she dismisses all alternatives except she's keeping no deal on the table. The truth is, she had no strategy when she triggered Article 50. She's negotiated a bad deal, and when the wheels have come off the bogey, her idea of seeking consensus is threatening Parliament. When will she recognise her own failures and do the right thing and walk?
Say to the honourable gentleman that we have indeed engaged with others across the House. I've engaged with his right honourable friend, the leader of the Scottish National Party, and with other leaders of other parties. There are different views across this House. I do not agree with revoking Article 50. I think we should deliver on the Brexit vote. That's a difference of opinion between us. But we have reached out to see if there is an opportunity to find a way to ensure that we can see us able to leave the European Union with a deal that delivers for people, delivers to protect their jobs, delivers to protect their security, and delivers to protect our union.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Thank you. The Prime Minister has tested to destruction the possibility of getting the DUP and the right-wing ERG to get her deal through this House. She could, however, get it through if she agreed to just check it still is genuinely the will of the people. Instead of listening to 14 men in fast cars who came to Chequers, would she actually listen to the million people who walk past her door? And will she also agree, considering that she spoke earlier about female multitasking, will she agree to meet with a delegation of 14 women parliamentarians from across this House? And let's really get things done.
Can I say to the honourable lady, as I've indicated to others, and I think as she knows, because we've previously sat down and discussed these matters, that I am always happy to reach out and talk to members of across the House. I do have a difference of opinion with the honourable lady in relation to the issue of a second referendum, because I believe we should actually deliver on the first.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2002, the newly elected chairperson of the Conservative Party said, "Twice we went to the country, unchanged, unrepentant, just plain unattractive, and twice we got slaughtered.
That chairperson was the Prime Minister herself. Has the prospect of bringing her rotten deal back a third time made her reflect on those comments?
What I reflect on is the need to ensure that we deliver Brexit and that we do it in a good way for the United Kingdom.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On several occasions, the Prime Minister has referred to the result of the 2014 Scottish referendum and correctly observed that a majority of people then voted to remain in the United Kingdom. But she will know that a great many of those people believed the promises made by her party and her government that by doing so they would firstly retain their European citizenship and secondly that their views would be respected within the United Kingdom. Given how things have turned out, does she understand that many of those people are now reconsidering that decision?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we went into the European Union as one United Kingdom. We will leave the European Union as one United Kingdom. Many people say to me who voted Remain in the referendum in 2016 that they believe that we should be delivering on the vote. Although they took a different decision, they do believe that it's important that the decision is respected and that we deliver on it.
Prime Minister, colleagues, thank you. Yes, indeed.